Good morning. I'm here with Representative Mike Chippendale and Representative Doreen Costa, and I'm grateful that they are supportive of my mission to improve DCYF. Today we meet nearly 2 years after Representative Rhode Silva boldly introduced legislation to halt the reprehensible practice of placing Rhode Island orphans in out-of-state placements. Within the past week, we have seen progress in my federal court case against Rhode Island DCYF for events that occurred following my employment with the Rhode Island State House of Representatives. Earlier this week, U.S. District Court Judge John J. McConnell Jr. granted several motions to withdraw motions to dismiss. Judge McConnell also overruled the state of Nebraska's motion to dismiss, as well as a second motion to dismiss. In a Target 12 investigation released earlier this week, Walt Buteau brought to light an itemized lien issued by the Executive Office of Health and Human Services that requests reimbursement from any potential settlement for costs associated with my time in the care and custody of the Rhode Island Department of Children, Youth, and Families. Upon my preliminary observation, and in the opinion of those who join me here today, the state of Rhode Island and Providence Plantations, responsible for the tempest that ensued in my life between 2002 and 2005, has shamelessly overstepped ethical boundaries by and through the request for $206,918.39 from any potential settlement that may be reached in Alahverdian versus Rhode Island DCYF and others. The characteristics of this lien indicate that the state of Rhode Island and Providence Plantations desires to be reimbursed for costs that the state incurred while I was in the care and custody of the Rhode Island DCYF. These costs include per diem rates for group homes and shelters, including Communities for People Incorporated of Boston and Community Solutions Incorporated of Connecticut, two placements which have been shut down by state officials multiple times for abuse and negligence. Additionally, the state of Rhode Island wishes to be reimbursed for hospitalizations that were necessary because of the physical and sexual abuse upon my person at Communities for People and Community Solutions, as well as several other placements. The state has thereby made a faulty determination that I am responsible for costs which were incurred as a proximate result of sexually and physically abusive behavior by the agencies with which it has contracts. Nearly 2 years ago, I stood in the rotunda of this State House and detailed the years of pain and horror following my employment with the Rhode Island House of Representatives. As a state employee hired by Speaker Gordon D. Fox himself, I began to arrive in the House chamber covered in bruises, cuts, and other injuries, while I carried the burden of nightly violence against me that ensued in night-to-night shelters. When I began to speak to the media in late 2002 and early 2003, Judge Jeremiah S. Jeremiah, former DCYF Director J.G. Lindgren, and Governor Donald L. Kacheri took the steps to exile me from Rhode Island until my 18th birthday, where I was not allowed to contact any legislators, lawyers, the courts, the media, or even my DCYF social worker or the child advocate. Following that press conference, the DCYF, against state laws pertaining to the confidentiality of records of abuse and neglect, publicly stated that there were, and I quote, no substantiated findings of abuse in Alahverdian's case. That statement was false. Only yesterday, as the state's assertion of a lien against an orphan garnished media attention, an Executive Office of Health and Human Services spokesperson informed representatives of the press that the assertion of a lien on a lawsuit was typical and not unusual and aimed to reimburse the state for services rendered. However, the state of Rhode Island was involved in rendering unconstitutional, abusive, and negligent services, and now it seeks to be reimbursed for the rendering of the aforesaid treacherous treatment. The state's most powerful officials, including Governor Lincoln D. Chafee, Speaker Gordon D. Fox, and Senate President Teresa Paiva, have done nothing to rectify the abuse and the negligence that I suffered. Furthermore, multiple bills aimed to reform and improve the Rhode Island Department of Children, Youth, and Families and halt out-of-state placements, bills which had over 50 co-sponsors in the House of Representatives in a 75-member chamber, failed to even be voted in committee to make it out onto the floor for a vote. The state has turned a blind eye to this growing epidemic, but the thunder of a broken system continues to roar. I finally realized the totality of the disinterest of the state when I was informed that during a status conference in a federal judge's chambers, Judge McConnell inquired of Assistant Attorney General Brenda Baum about why the state had not offered even so much as an apology as a method of settlement. Assistant Attorney General Baum's response was, and I quote, "I am Irish, Your Honor. I would rather die than apologize." Since 2002, I have been taught a hard lesson. Being a whistleblower, even if one barely crosses the threshold of effectiveness, leads to further unethical and immoral conduct. This conduct was perpetrated on my person, and the state seeks to be repaid for this conduct. I have pledged my life and my efforts to ensuring that no Rhode Island child faces similar conduct. I am joined today by two of Rhode Island's most determined legislators to announce a legislative scheme to terminate the abusive and reckless practices of the state's most disreputable and heavily criticized department. First, to supervise and care for Rhode Island's most vulnerable children, the bill to halt out-of-state placements will be introduced for the third consecutive year. No child, unless the service required is not offered in Rhode Island, will be sent to another state far away from family and home and more susceptible to being subjected to unreported abuse and neglect occurring hundreds of miles away. Second, a joint resolution will be introduced to form the Emergency Oversight Commission on the Department of Children, Youth, and Families. Legislators are elected to serve their constituency, and in order to more effectively supervise a rogue entity of our state, we must combat their ability to act without tough, effective oversight. Legislators are the most effective observers because as they observe, they can identify areas that can be legislatively improved. Third, a bill shall be introduced in each chamber that will guarantee the constitutional, personal property, and civil rights of every child placed or treated under the supervision of the Rhode Island Department of Children, Youth, and Families in any public or private facility. Under this bill, no child shall be prevented from contacting an attorney, the courts, the clergy, or law enforcement. The presently codified Children's Bill of Rights will be distributed to each child upon entrance into any department facility in language consistent with the child's comprehension. Each child will also be afforded the right to appeal any decision made by the Family Court to the Rhode Island Supreme Court. Just 2 years ago, a report issued by the National Coalition for Child Protection Reform exposed that the state of Rhode Island has a practice of institutionalizing children at a rate of 80% above the national average and was, and I quote, exporting children to other states at an alarmingly high rate. With the passage of this new legislation, we will end those practices and vigorously defend reputable service providers such as St. Mary's Home for Children and local foster homes. We will also end the Department of Children, Youth, and Families' practice of spending $10 million annually on out-of-state placements and instead divert the funding to enhancing the infrastructure of Rhode Island's system of care. We send a clear and forceful message to Governor Chafee, to President Paiva, and to the man who hired me 10 years ago, Speaker Gordon D. Fox, that we will not falter on this path to justice. We will ensure that the 2013 General Assembly session will hereafter be known as the year that Rhode Island orphans and wards of the state are afforded long overdue victories. A victory of safe foster homes and placements, a victory of relative normalcy, and a victory that solidifies a bright future for Rhode Island's most vulnerable population. We firmly assert our legislative strategy, and we will confront any foe of this common sense legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicholas. I'm State Representative Mike Chippendale from District 40. I have come to know Mr. Alahverdian for the past 2 years in the legislature as he's lobbied very hard to educate legislators on this particular issue. I've been proudly a co-sponsor of the legislation of which Mr. Alahverdian spoke, and do plan to be one of the sponsors of this legislation in the 2013 season. The DCYF issue is certainly brought to light with Mr. Alahverdian's case, and certainly there are a lot of elements to it that are very uncomfortable for people to even hear, but sadly true. In just a very cursory research, it's not very difficult to dig up past stories that have been documented in local media outlets, etc., that not only show the dysfunction of the DCYF department in the state, but document, quite frankly, that it appears the state is not necessarily interested in improving the conditions that exist. Just at a glance, again, Mr. Alahverdian did allude to the fact that the state is spending $10 million a year to send approximately 108 children out of state, as far as Florida and Nebraska, where there can be no legitimate oversight by DCYF caseworkers. For obvious reasons, there are thousands of miles separating the two. That works out to about $89,900 a year per child. The state of Rhode Island is spending about $45,000 a year to house inmates in the ACI. if we can provide inmates with the services that they receive in the ACI, who are obviously lawbreakers, and in most cases in the ACI they are above the age of consent, being 18 years old or older. If we can provide them with what they get for $45,000, $89,000 per child, and remember, we're talking about children, the most vulnerable in our community, and our future, Rhode Island's future and America's future. We have the resources. In 2010, the state of Rhode Island was seeking to save money in DCYF, and was very proud to announce that they were expecting to save about $1 million by closing down 3 children's shelters. They also admitted that they've made a decision to close the shelters, but yet they don't have a fully vetted plan. And that's a quote from Mr. Paul Fitzgerald, the President and Chief Executive Officer of AIDS Care Ocean State of Rhode Island, which was working with DCYF. So where we see a pattern of seeking to save money in the form of $1 million by closing down in-state institutions, and then we also see $10 million being spent to send children thousands of miles away from the state where perhaps family and community ties exist, I find this practice to be particularly offensive and reprehensible. I have strongly supported this legislation over the past few years and intend to continue to do so, whether or not in a primary fashion or as a co-sponsor. I'm looking forward to getting a solid group of legislators together. This is fair legislation. This is seeking to protect, again, the most vulnerable in our communities, our children. We really need to step up and get on the right path with DCYF. There's a lot of unanswered questions. Mr. Alahverdian's case certainly sheds a lot of light on some of the workings or the inner workings of the system that is, in my opinion, completely dysfunctional. And that is documented, again, in just a cursory glance at some of the news articles without even digging deep. However, having heard 2 years worth of testimony on this bill, I can assure you that this dysfunction goes much deeper. Certainly this issue is something that cannot go away, cannot be brushed under the carpet, and to whatever extent I am able to in my official capacity push this forward and get it into the spotlight, I am absolutely dedicated to doing so. I stand proudly here with Mr. Alahverdian by his side. I give him the highest credit for standing up and standing for not only himself, but for future children who are going to obviously endure the same or similar treatment, or maybe doing it right now. One of my colleagues, Representative Costa, is also here to join me, and I will turn the microphone over to her for comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. I couldn't have said it better myself. Our mission in the next General Assembly session is to dig deeper into DCYF and find out how many abused children are out there, how many are actually out of state, how many are still here in Rhode Island. When you're abused and you're taken from a home because of child abuse in your home or neglect, and to be put into another foster home run by the state that is also, you're being abused there, this is just unacceptable, it's despicable, and it has to stop. So Representative Chippendale and I and Nick and several other representatives will be introducing legislation or co-sponsoring legislation. There has to be a stop to this, and I personally think there's so much more to the story. We need some more young, brave men and women that are now 16, 17, 18 to come forward. We're here for you. We want to listen to you. We're here to help. That's our job as legislators. We create legislation that's going to help the community, that's going to protect the children, and that's what Rep. Chippendale and I are here to do. And we're asking other legislators to come on board with us.
And just kind of TV simple terms, what exactly is this piece of legislation? What exactly would it do in the kind of the simplest context to explain to a viewer?
The most recent version was House Bill 7135, which was introduced in the last legislative session. Essentially, the summary of it is that the act would require the family court not grant approval for out-of-state child placement until the court